Welcome to this week's lesson. This week we're going to be studying a very interesting topic. Well, this quarter we're going to be studying on crucible. Crucible, mainly it means it's a severe test, a trial, an extremely challenging experience. And this is something that is common to every human being, born of a woman. We've all experienced some crucible of sorts in our lives. Of interest, we're going to be looking at Psalms 23. Psalms 23 is a common chapter. It's been sung by many people. Many authors have written a lot about it. So we're going to just take a glimpse of how the psalm talks about crucibles in our lives. The psalm starts with the author David acknowledging that God, is his shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in need. I shall not be in want. It's acknowledging that we are led by God. God leads our paths. Just like Joseph, God directs our paths. And so the author is acknowledging the presence of God in their lives. He goes on further and he talks about how God leads them in paths of righteousness, how God leads them beside still waters, how God leads them, on the lush green grass, and everything is going well. That's typical of a Christian's life. And during that period, you really feel that God is leading you, and you've got confidence that what God has opened many doors. That's not a difficult thing to appreciate. The challenge comes when we're now looking at the two issues that the psalmist raises, in his journey of life. The first thing that he raises is that, even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that's the first one. All of a sudden, you ask yourself, okay, is the shepherd leading the sheep through the valley of the shadow of death? Or has the sheep strayed? Or has someone deliberately, distracted the sheep? While it's in that place, you ask yourself, okay, what's the point of the sheep suffering? Why is the sheep going through a dark valley? What will it learn? Is there anything of value that will be learned there? I would want to agree with many people who would say that, sometimes going through a difficult experience is okay, is beneficial if you know why you're going through it. If you know that you will come out of it victorious, you can withstand, you can endure the experience of the crucible. But it's very difficult to endure the experience of the crucible whilst you're going through a difficult time and you don't know why, and you don't know what will come out of it. Someone who goes through pregnancy, and through childbirth, will have the hope of holding a child, will have the hope, of something good coming out of it. But now if you go through the valley and there is no hope of something good coming out of it, it becomes a very painful crucible. It becomes a very painful crucible. So the psalmist talks about that valley of the shadow of death. And I don't know what valley you're in, and whether the Lord led you there, whether you went there by yourself, whether people or other things pushed you in that valley. But this is definitely an experience that we go through. The second experience that the psalmist talks about is how God, prepares the table in the presence of his enemies. It's interesting that you have enemies coming out when God is leading you. Sometimes we think that God will lead us in straight paths where we won't meet any of our adversaries. But here the psalmist raises an issue of enemies. Now I asked myself, where do you find your enemies? Who are my enemies? What enemies are they talking about? The psalmist makes it very clear. Your enemies are not very far from you. Your enemies are people you engage with every day. Your enemies are people who are very close to you. Your enemies are the people who sit with you on your table and when you celebrate. So when David goes to sit on the table and eat, he knows that when his friends come, when his close buddies come, even his enemies are there. So enemies are part and parcel of your family. Enemies are also within your friends, your close friends. That's where your enemies are. And that's what David is saying. Do you know what? in this journey of life, I find myself sitting on the table with enemies. How can you pick out enemies? I mean, if you take time, you would also check your life to see, okay, which ones would I call enemies? Which ones would I classify as enemies? Remember, you can't do away with these enemies because these enemies are family or friends, are very close. Sarah, you cannot just block them. You cannot just escape from them. They will always appear. You've got family and friends who give you advice, which is a mixture of medication to heal and poison to kill. You discover that sometimes you have to sift some of this advice. Why? Because while someone seems to be very interested in your welfare, they actually want more of your downfall than your rising. So to me, that's one category of enemies. Another category of enemies are those family and friends who you're only close when you're together, as in just the two of you and them, you're close. But when a third party comes in, when their wider circle enlarges, they push you out of that circle because they're embarrassed to be with you. They don't want to be associated with you. You do not reflect the type of relative they want to have. I would also put those ones as enemies. That group of people makes people carry, heavy crucibles, in life, and they have people asking themselves, am I incomplete? What have I done wrong? They are those enemies. Someone said, family, feminists, friends, frenemies. So there are some of those guys who wait for you to make a mistake, who wait to take an advantage of you once you are down, like how the lioness would be hunting its prey. It waits for the prey to just make the mistake and then it pounces on them. The enemies like that in our inner circles and in our family and friends. There are some who are always just almost ready to help you, but they never come through. They're almost always just about to help you, on the verge. They're just almost about to help you all the time, but they never do. They never do. Be careful of such. But the greatest of them for me is sometimes we are our own enemies. We ourselves, our very own selves, we are our own enemies. We allow ourselves to miss opportunities. We allow ourselves to be undisciplined, to be uncommitted. We allow ourselves to be deceived. We reject the love that we get. We reject advice that we get. We make wrong, uninformed, ill-advised decisions that haunt us and hurt us, for the greater part of our lives. These things will hurt our hearts, our health, our wealth, and our happiness. And, when we go to sit at the table where David had gone to sit, we discover that, what? I am my own enemy. Be wary of that enemy. Be wary of that enemy. That is the most dangerous enemy that you might face because, they self-destruct. Now, as we're going to conclude, you discover that the Psalm of David is a victory psalm. It's one who goes through the valley and comes out victorious, one who sits with the enemies at the table and their head is still anointed, But sometimes, the reality of things is we go through the valley, and come out defeated. Sometimes enemies do disturb and disrupt our lives, and sometimes they come, and that is really a crucible. That is really a crucible, a painful experience where that what I'm going through, I might never really see anything good out of it. Before I conclude, I liked the verse that when it says that, he prepares the table before me and he says, he anoints my head with oil, my cup overflows. It's like right there in the middle of his enemies. David is saying, God will still find purpose in my life. God will still fulfill his desires for my life, regardless of the intentions and the moves of the enemies, regardless of what the enemies will do. The Lord will still find purpose and usefulness in my life. So when we go through these crucibles, especially the crucible where sometimes we go through the valley of death, of the shadow of death, and we don't, come out alive. Sometimes we sit with our enemies and disrupt them. When we go through that type of crucible, I would want to encourage you to go back to Psalms 23 verse 1. The Lord is my shepherd. Let us keep trusting and hoping and believing that the Lord is leading us. Let us not grow weary of the Lord's leadership. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of His word.